Welcome to Series 4 of the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And we pay our respects to leaders past, present and emerging. In this series, we're talking with amazing mums. We ask their tips, advice on how they raise their boys, all the while leading successful and diverse lives. As usual, we ask our questions of what is it to be a good man these days? And if you had a story that you could tell a 14-year-old boy and he'd listen, what would the story be? I'm Dr. Ray Swan, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys in the modern world. The series is brought to you by Bryden Grammar, an all-boys school based in Melbourne, Australia. Joining us today on the Understanding Boys podcast is Daisy Turnbull. Daisy is a teacher, a director of wellbeing, a counsellor, and an author of 2 inspiring books, 50 Risks to Take with Your Kids, which is a guide to building resilience and independence in their first 10 years, and her follow-up book, 50 Questions to Ask Your Teens, which is all about fostering communication and confidence in young adults. I hope you enjoy listening to this podcast as much as I enjoyed the conversation with Daisy. So joining us on the Understanding Boys podcast is Daisy Turnbull, teacher, parent, writer, counsellor, podcaster. The list goes on and on. Very grateful for your time. How do you manage to fit it all in?
Well, you also didn't include their mad crocheter because I'm a mad crocheter. So everyone's like, how do you have time to crochet? And I'm like, I do it while I watch TV, you know. I don't know. I'm someone who just I think I'm very much an extrovert, and I do a lot in a day. My eldest child, my son Jack, was the world's greatest cat napper as a baby. And so where most parents, you know, get a 2-hour nap in the middle of the day, I would get a 40-minute period of time. So I've learnt to do things in very short periods of time. And but I think, you know, my house is a mess and I'm often behind in paperwork and that kind of thing. So swings and roundabouts.
Somebody's got to give, doesn't it? So tell me the crochet. I mean, that's fascinating. I remember I think it was my grandmother was right into knitting and you know, I'm not sure it's exactly the same thing, but what got you into crochet?
Yeah, so it's actually a really funny story. My grandmother was a huge knitter, and she used to cast on and cast off for me. She's still alive. She lives 94. She's 94 years old. She lives 10 doors down the road from me.
Wow.
And I remember as a teenager, I think I was about 18 or 19, she said to me, she couldn't cast on or cast off for me anymore because her arthritis was getting painful. And I remember that being the moment. So she was like at this point 74, thinking, oh my God, she's getting old. Like this is a thing that happens. Then, you know, 9 or 10 years later, a girlfriend of mine, Julie, was really into crochet, and I hadn't knitted in ages, and she taught me, and it was something that I really connected with while I was undergoing IVF, because my son was, both my kids were conceived through IVF, but it was like a mindfulness thing for me of this, like if I make a square every day, and they went towards their blankets. But the funny thing was I went and told my grandma, and I said, oh, you know, I've gotten into crochet. And she said to me, oh, darling, that's very working class. And I was like, what? And she goes, it's a very working class hobby because it uses less wool.
Oh, okay.
And knitting, I guess, is, I don't know, for her generation, she's 94, she can get away with saying whatever she wants.
Probably earned the right by then. Yeah,
knitting was like more, I don't know, more what middle-class ladies did. And I just thought it was hilarious. So yeah, I love crochet and I still knit a bit, but it's just something I do. I make gifts for friends, or this year my daughter wants to go as Fabio, the world famous flamingo detective, that well-known piece of literature that you've probably forgotten about or never read. So I'm making her a flamingo beanie, that kind of thing. So it's really fun.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I was writing today actually just about the value of curiosity and how, I don't know about you, but so many of my habits that I think when I was a kid I just did because they were fun, like riding my bike. Like now my bike has become, I've got a Garmin watch and it tells me how fast I'm going and I'm trying to get fitter. And like I'm kind of turning into this miserable, person who's just always trying to improve all the time actually across all these different domains. Whereas I suspect something like crochet by its nature being so creative and it's sort of challenging in that you've got to think about it, but it's not like especially once you get to a good level, I imagine you're able to, it's something that you can do. So it's that nice mix between challenge and reward.
Yeah. And it's actually something I use as an analogy when I'm talking to teenagers about, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi's theory of flow. So I talk about how I always have a really easy project that I'm doing that I can literally do like blindfolded, watching TV with subtitles. I don't need to look at it at all. And then I will sometimes have a project that's a really tricky one and I have to count my stitches, blah. And, it is a lot of work and it uses a different part of my brain. But then the one that I like is one that's a little bit complex. It's not just monotonous, but it's that, that one-step challenge. And so something like that, I find that quite good. I do sometimes wish I could not crochet and instead, learn an instrument, but it's what I like doing.
Yeah, beautiful. When you're talking about flow, and I was thinking, I know you work obviously in wellbeing with kids, and that just that necessary idea. Not all of our listeners would be across that work. I mean, for you and when you're working with, particularly with teenagers, what are some of the things you talk about in flow and challenge? I mean, to me, it almost seems like a fundamental part of who we are, that we're able just to kind of enter that sort of play but challenge state.
Yeah, so flow is that state where you're really, it's, I guess in layman's terms, you're really in the zone, and it can be doing anything. It could be, people talk about one of their jobs as a teenager is like stacking shelves at a supermarket, and you just get really into the zone of like putting things away. Or it could be something that you're really it could be losing yourself in a book, or it could be, you're really struggling to start writing an essay, but then once you get into the flow of it, you just like you go. And that's a really important thing for teenagers to learn, to embrace that and to work in it rather than fighting it. Because for a lot of teenagers, it can be very easy to get distracted. And if we think about flow, the opposite of flow is your phone pinging at you all the time, and your phone and all the distractions on it and all the dopamine hits break flow or don't let you get into flow.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I've talked on this podcast before, but there is a study that came out, I think now it was at the end of last year, that even found that even having a phone in your room was a distraction, even if it was turned off.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing.
And I would say, just remembering that this is very much a boys-focused podcast, video games are an excellent example of a state of flow. When you're really into a video game, you are in a state of flow. But that's not to say that that's the only way you should practice flow.
So with your kids, you're talking about Jack and where he's at. I mean, what's going to be your approach around games and gaming and your thoughts, around some of that? Because if he's not already there, both your kids, they're going to be in that space pretty quick.
Yeah. So my kids both have iPads and they have screen time limits on their apps. And my son gets, during term time, I think it's like half an hour of Roblox. Sometimes he'll ask for an extension. Most of the time he asks for an extension, but I will give it to him if he is playing with friends and they're like on FaceTime at the same time, because I see that as a social benefit. But I try and limit it. Judith Locke, who's a great clinical psychologist, was talking recently, and she was saying that there's this study to show that kids who play or who are on screens between 1 to 2 hours a day perform better academically. And she's like, rather than kids who have no screen time or kids who do 4 hours of screen time. And it's actually that idea of creating that regulation. So it's really saying for me, saying to my kids, okay, well, if you want to do video games now, that means this afternoon you won't be able to, or making it a thing. So if he wants more time playing Roblox, I'll say, well, you need to go do some violin practice, or you need to read 20 pages of a book and kind of pay off the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting when we think about regulation, and I mean, that is our desired state, isn't it? That our kids are going to be able to self-regulate and manage and, go out and, do the rewilding experience and learn all about, and all the rest of it. But I don't know about you, but and again, I feel like we've talked about this a few times on this show, but again, just like technology is so invasive. I don't even know if I'm managing my technology that well.
No, and I'm not great. Well, I'm not great because I am someone who will reply to a text message or never reply to it. Like it has to happen automatically or I'll forget about it. And so I do often, I think it's Gretchen Rubin who wrote a book on happiness, and she had this line of don't procrastinate anything that takes less than 2 minutes, which is a great rule, except that does mean I'm always just replying to a text message or an email or whatever it is. And I think for me, it's about putting my phone away and role modeling that behavior for our kids. So I have an app that I get students to use called Forest. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I haven't.
And, it's great. So it's like the Pomodoro method, but you plant a tree, and then if you touch your phone, so you might plant the tree for 25 minutes or an hour. If you touch your phone in that time or close the app, the tree dies. And it looks really sad and dead on like this grid of trees. And you earn points or leaves. And then when you have enough leaves, you can buy prettier trees and, that kind of thing. And I think there is this whole thing where they actually end up planting real trees somewhere. So there's like a carbon offsetting thing going on. But I used to use it with students. So at the start of the class, we'd all plant a tree. And if anyone, touch their phone, because, you can say you can't have your phone at school, take it away. But when you're dealing with year 12 students and your autonomy and your authority is really starting to dwindle, actually creating a rule with all of you and you hold yourself to the same rule can be really effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And again, I know where I work, we're just looking at the phone use again with kids and the direction around that. And, we don't want to see them in classes, but then what happens if their laptop runs out of power or, there's always use cases, for different things. But I guess it does speak to that broader challenge that we all have, which is about, our engagement levels and where we feel a lot of our time is going, which is into technology, and particularly coming out of COVID, where I think we really shifted, shifted how we talk to each other and how we connect to people. And so it's not all bad, is it? I mean, sometimes technology is good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, for me, I have had some really good experiences through social media. I've made great friends through it. There are really lovely communities on there. And for my kids, playing video games online with friends was the only way they can communicate. But we do know there are risks. Like, for example, we know with YouTube, there are risks of radicalization, and that can happen just through scrolling through the videos that are presented to you through the algorithm.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to chat to you a bit about your general thoughts about parenting, because I think you occupy a number of really interesting spaces. Obviously, you're a parent, you work with kids and parents in that area, and obviously through your books and your counselling and everything else you do, you've got a really broad yet still quite specific set of things around parenting and a lot to offer. I mean, but I'm also interested in your own parenting and what has parenting taught you, as a human being, like, as Daisy, what does that become? How is it changing you?
I remember talking to another teacher who was focused in wellbeing and positive psychology a few years ago, and she said it would be fascinating to do a study on the children of wellbeing coordinators because I think that we often learn and teach in double time. Because I was a teacher before I was a parent, I was aware of some of the traps of modern parenting, like, for example, overparenting. And I have seen parents step in where it is really unhelpful to do so. So to start with, I didn't want to be that person. And I was also very aware of the risks with overparenting around, the risks that then led to me writing 50 risks to take with your kids. So with my kids, I, tried to let them test their own boundaries for how far they could run or, jumping on furniture, that kind of thing. I do think I probably let my kids argue with me more than I probably should have. But I'm hoping that that's
just for
developing
practice,
critical thinking skills. Yeah, just for practice and critical thinking skills. There was something online that said, hey, when you were kids and people told you you'd be a great lawyer, did you realize they were saying you were actually a dick? No, like, so look, I probably, my kids are quite good at arguing, and their logic is good. But you know, that can sometimes be a bit exhausting. But I try really hard to be honest with the kids. And they are really lovely kids. They're very, and I try and bring them up in a way where they are socially aware, self-aware, and kind and curious. And, you know, I think, you know, they're doing okay. That being said, though, my book was not, even though there are anecdotes about the kids, my book is not based on the kids. My book is based on research because, you know, I don't know what my kids are going to turn out like. So if I wrote the whole book about my kids and then, you know, they're not great role models when they're older, touch hope that's not the case, then that's a bad premise for a book. So it is based on evidence more than that. But I have done all the risks in 50 risks. 50 questions is interesting, though, because that's obviously for teenagers. And my kids are not yet teenagers. So a lot of it is based around my experience with teaching teenagers, but also what the evidence shows around the stuff we want teenagers to know about.
Yeah, great. And I want to dive into the books and in just a moment. I just want to, just getting back to the parenting and the you piece, you know, I read recently something you wrote where you said about patience and love as a parent, that patience and love is really important. And I was just curious about that again, just before we jump into the books, maybe as an overall heading, particularly when we look at the questions to ask. But why is it, from your perspective, that patience and love, I mean, you know, are such important ingredients from a parenting perspective, from what you've learned as Daisy?
Well, I think, you know, love is always the most important thing when you're parenting, and knowing, and your kids knowing that they are loved unconditionally. Doesn't mean you always have to like them, because they can sometimes be very annoying, and you too can be very annoying. But your kids knowing that they have a safe and secure attachment with you from a young age is a really important thing. And for me, growing up, I always had this great relationship with my parents, always knew I was loved regardless of, you know, regardless of behavior or things like that. I think the patience stuff, that article was actually written around childcare policy and around the New South Wales and Victorian government doing funding for universal preschool. And I was saying, you know, a lot of people are saying, oh, but who's going to get the money for this next year? And I was like, the whole point of any policy around children or education is it takes time to see the impact. So much like teaching your kids to tie their shoelaces or get dressed or ride a bike, it does, you know, you don't see the payoff immediately, and you've got to be patient with these things, and then they do start doing it. And I think with childcare, that's where our mindset has to be. We know the benefits of early education for children, and we see the results later on, but you may not see the results next year.
It does take time, doesn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the books. I've read them. They're absolutely fantastic. And for the listeners, we are running a competition around this, and you can jump on understandingboys.com.au to check out the details of that, or just simply get one at any good bookseller. I wanted to start with 50 questions for teens, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When in looking at it, you know, one of the things you wrote about was just how students often with behaviour issues who have parents who step in way too much or not at all. I just thought that was so fascinating as an idea. And you were saying earlier, you know, in the lead up to writing the books, that you'd been a teacher and you kind of knew the dangers maybe of, you know, when it's unhelpful to intervene as well. So again, as a guiding principle, you know, in the lead up to this book, just your thoughts, how do parents kind of gauge, you know, where, how high or low, you know, are they in a helicopter, or are they in a bus, or, you know, what does it sort of look like? Just as a general approach to parenting, do you think?
I think there are a few issues when parents step in, right? So the first one is this idea of, am I doing it as a way of showing up for my kid? because we know that as kids get older and get into that early teenage stage, they can start, rebelling against their parents. And so sometimes the parent steps in to kind of triangulate this relationship where it's like, it's me and my kid against the school. And by me doing this, that my, son or daughter will see how much I'm in their corner and ready to fight for them. If that's a reason to do it, if that's your reason for doing it, that's not a great reason. The other question to ask yourself is this the kind of problem they will be dealing with on their own as they get older? So, for example, Josh doesn't do his homework and gets detention, and the parent replies saying that's unfair to give him detention. He was busy at my brother's birthday party. Well, that's also on Josh to learn to have that conversation. So I think that idea of like, are we expecting them to do this as they grow up? Then we should be getting them to do it on their own. You might want to say, hey, Josh, I know you didn't get your homework done, and I know you don't want to do this detention. Why don't we chat together, parent and child, about how you can talk to the teacher about it? That is a far more useful thing.
Yeah, because giving them that agency as well. I mean, I think that's great advice. I'm just going to go back over it so people don't miss it. So the first thing you were saying is that when parents take on the advocate role, you kind of really do need to check in with what's your intention. Are you trying to bridge another gap or a line around a common enemy?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's so true because you're absolutely right. I mean, it doesn't really help. In fact, sometimes it can really muddy the waters. I remember years ago having a beautiful conversation with a student who'd really got it wrong behaviourally in a couple of things. We had a great conversation, really landed, really could see what had happened and was able to articulate it, and then went home and I think had a conversation with the parent, which was an advocate conversation, and had completely flipped.
Yeah.
The next day, and it was like, wow, we were so close to this because again, ultimately, we're wanting our kids to grow into good people and that they understand, accept the responsibilities of who they are and their impact and their behaviour, in others and in groups. And the second thing you were saying was just about asking yourself that question: will this be something that my child will need to deal with in real life?
Yeah, exactly.
And then from that, yeah, great. That's really fantastic. Yeah.
And I think the third thing is am I helping them by doing it? And that's I think the biggest thing, and is there a better way we can manage this situation? So am I doing it to create a bond? Is it something they should be able to do, and am I helping them by doing it?
Yeah. Yeah. Because often it is the opposite, isn't it? You're getting in the way. Yeah.
So I think that was on the teen stuff.
Yeah. No, great. I did have a laugh. There was one question which I loved, which I did. This was my laugh out loud one. Question 38, why is my teen embarrassed by me? That's so good.
It's really sweet, actually. When I was writing the book, there was this very funny moment where my editor emailed me and she said, oh, my God, we've got 51 questions. And I said, no, we've only got 50. And then she replied, going, no, wait, we've only got 49. We need an extra question. And I was like, no way, I swear we did 50. How have we stuffed this up? And I think just in the editing process. But I had been talking to a friend of mine who has a teenage daughter. And so I rang him and I said, look, this scenario that you presented to me about picking your daughter up from school or dropping her off and the hot chocolate, could I snaffle it away and use it in the book? And he was like, yeah, sure. Didn't think it would actually cut it. And so then when I gave him a copy, I actually wrote in it, I was like, on that question, I was like, by the way, this is the youngest daughter. And he's like, I got in so much trouble for that. So it was de-anonymized for her. Yeah, I think it's a fun question, but it's also hugely universal, right? We've all been embarrassed by our parents. And in fact, there are two TikTok, Instagram reel people that I sometimes watch. One is Millie Graham, who I'm sure you've seen. She does great impersonations of teachers. And the other one is a girl called Maddie McRae. And she does this great one where it's like you're cleaning up and your mum asks you to clean the dishes while you're cleaning the dishes. And it's like, she's like, I'm doing it. I showed it to my son and I was like, is this what I do? And he's like, that is exactly what you do. And so I think watching some of this TikTok stuff, I'm like, oh, I'm the embarrassing parent. I'm not the kid here.
I got a great piece of advice in a similar vein from my son on parenting when he was about, I don't know, he might have been about 5 or 6. And, you know, he kind of rolls with it a fair bit, my son, but he did sit Beck and I down and he said to us, okay, I have to tell you something. And we're like, oh, goodness, what's going on here? You know, he said, only one of you is allowed to tell me off at once, because if you both tell me off, it's just too much. And it was such a great insight, because it was like, okay, so, you know, it was like, hello, good cop, bad cop, but it was sort of actually really useful to know, you know, how we were being received in that space as well. Because, I mean, a lot of what this podcast seems to be about is actually understanding the impact of us as we work with our kids, actually, and who we're becoming as parents, because it's tricky, it's humbling, it's, you know, we're embarrassed, we're embarrassing, you know, we're getting in the way, we're trying to help, but it's not helping.
And I think that's the thing. And I think especially with boys, you know, showing up and being there with your kids is, it does, the form of that changes. So for example, you know, my son and I have started watching Stranger Things together. So we started watching these holidays, and we have great conversations while we watch it. You know, sometimes we pause and talk about the characters. And I know when we're talking about the characters, we're actually talking maybe about a situation that, you know, he has had with an underground alien monster. No, you know, like a friendship situation or something. But talking about it through a show is actually a really great way that we have time together.
Let's jump into 50 risks to take with kids. It's such a great idea. So perfect for now, you know, in the world that we live in. I'm sure you've had some amazing feedback, and I guess you would have everything from people saying this is exactly what we need to be doing to people saying this is a bit socially responsible to be suggesting that we take risks. Like, how's it been received, the book generally?
You know, I haven't had anyone say this is really irresponsible. I also haven't had anyone say I tried that risk and it backfired. Like, so I am slightly worried about that. But that hasn't happened yet, fingers crossed and touch wood. What I have had a lot of is, this is what I've been doing, but I hadn't seen it written anywhere that it was the right thing to be doing. So it was really reaffirming. And that's great. And I have had some people say, look, some of it's fine, some of it I find a bit scary, but, you know, we're working up to it, that kind of thing. So I think the response has been generally quite good. And what is interesting with it is the generational stuff. So I've seen a lot of grandparents buy it for their kids to use on their grandkids. So grandparents who maybe raised their kids in the 80s are like you 80s raised kid are not raising your kid the same way. You're kind of being too bubble wrapped or whatever it is.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it sort of seems like intuitively it just feels right. It's the right thing to do, that we're too, you know, we've kind of moved away from, you know, the rough and, you know, it's probably not even the right term, but like rough and double play, or, you know, being out in the park till late and riding a skateboard till sunset, and, you know, all the things. From your perspective, what was the driver that you know to actually write the book? Was it that you were kind of looking at it going, what's this world, has it changed? Or
yeah, so I was very much looking at it from this perspective of seeing year 7 kids when they come into the senior school and thinking, what do you want them to be able to do by the time they're in year 7? And the idea for the books was one big book, like it was like 101 things to do before you are an adult. And one of the ones was to sit on hold to Telstra, right? Like it was kind of, there was a jokey element to it. But then, you know, obviously the writing and editing process changes these things. But so then it was split into 2. And as you know, my experience is in senior teaching, so I felt a lot more confident writing 50 questions, but I kind of had to do 50 risks because that's how chronology works. So it was, from my perspective, the risks were all about, what do you want a 12-year-old kid to be able to do? And what do you do to get them there?
When we look at the books as well, one of the questions, just jumping back into the question book that I loved, was really blew my mind, actually, particularly for this work, was number 28, which is, how can I help you be a man of compassion and respect? And I think that both books kind of, to me, what they really speak to from a parenting perspective is is about being real and authentic. And, it's such a recognition of, who we're becoming, as I was saying earlier, as parents. But have you had any responses around that particular question of being a man of compassion and respect?
No, because I do think that what we're all learning at the moment, especially in light of last year's consent crisis and all of that, is that, and in, Australia's domestic violence statistics, is that we do have an issue not so much with masculinity, but with, I would say I wouldn't say it's an issue with how boys are interacting with girls. Yet I wouldn't say that's the start of it. I would say it actually goes back even further, and it's boys understanding their emotions and having social emotional literacy, and being raised to talk openly about how they feel. And if we can raise young boys with the same emotional lexicon that we do young girls, then I think that future generations, a lot of this stuff will, I really hope that a lot of this stuff will improve. I really do believe that the patriarchy is, in many ways, just as bad for boys as it is for girls, because it puts men on a ladder, and if you don't fit in it, you feel like you're not doing it right. But there's many really positive definitions of masculinity.
Yeah, I agree. And, it was interesting, even at the ripe old age that I'm getting to, I'm still learning stuff about that. And look, one of them that was interesting was actually about asking questions. And, in terms of, you're talking about the emotional lexicon and, the ability to be able to name different, the subtleties of what's going on the internal world and all of that. But even asking a question, because someone put it, I was talking to someone the other day and they just said, oh yeah, so for men it's like, it wasn't even a conversation about masculinity. So I was just saying, in the man's world, it's like, if you ask a question, you lose a peg in the hierarchy. I was like, yeah, that's it. That just kind of is it. So if you're standing in a group, if you ask the question, you are signaling to everybody else that you are inferior somehow. So guys won't do that. And so they won't ask for help, forget about help. They won't even ask, for directions, or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Let alone, help. You out of your mind? Like, it's so interesting how it sort of shows up.
Yeah. And I think also, one of the things I talk about in there, and I have had a lot of feedback from people on this, because I pulled out some of it and put it into an opinion piece on love bombing, but on the kind of stages of coercive control and what's happening. And I think, in the last few years, our knowledge of what domestic violence is, or family domestic violence is, has changed. And the fact that it's being, in New South Wales, it's about to be legislated that it includes emotional and psychological abuse. But some of these things happen so unknowingly, and frankly, sometimes the perpetrator doesn't even realize they're doing it. And so it's that ability to tap into kind of, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? And how is it making me act? Is, from a younger age, what is it about this person that makes me want to behave a certain way, and seeing what is and isn't healthy there.
Yeah. And if I continue to do this, what's the impact on them? Like, how does that, that loop? So you're
exactly. And what will it look like?
Yeah. And again, knowing on some level, like, things are, that sense of right and wrong, I think sometimes people can get lost a lot in one of the things that I think tech does a little bit is we're seeing so much, and certain things are reinforced so much, like just in terms of your own hygiene of your brain, what you see and the images that our kids are, seeing all the time. Like where do they develop a sense of where does their moral formation occur?
And like even the way we text our friends and the jokes we make, like, I talk in there in the book about, be careful about what you put in group chats, and if you wouldn't want it on the cover of The Age or the Sydney Morning Herald, then don't put it in text. I think we do forget that when we type that there is another person on the other side of that screen.
Daisy, what is it to be a good man these days?
Yeah, so I think first I want to say I know a lot of really great men, and I think it's someone who knows themselves and supports their friends and is really supportive and kind to women in their lives, whether it's in relationships or not, but who but who really knows who they are and understands themselves and what they're trying to do, rather than just doing it because that's what's expected of them.
And if you had a story that you could tell a boy of 14 and he'd listen, what would the story be?
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? I don't know. I think talking to any teenager, giving them experiences that are, telling them of your experiences that are real, being honest and authentic with them is a really important thing. But I think stories, yeah, I'm really bad at this, sorry. I think a story like that you can tell them is times where you have stuffed up and what that impact has been. And explaining. And the other thing I think that's a really important one to talk to young boys and girls about is and this isn't so much a story, but asking them what they mean by that. And so if you ever hear someone say something that might be inappropriate, or it might be, to go like, what do you mean by that? And explaining that sometimes we all say things not really understanding what was behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, great. It's a sort of sense of curiosity, isn't it? Like it's and kindness that you're referring to earlier. Daisy, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you. As I said, I think your books are tremendous, and I understand you've got another one in the works. No. Okay, you're done. Okay. Might have been sounding like your editor a little bit there, or your agent possibly. So no more books.
No books yet.
Okay, so just maybe some more crochet.
Yeah, more crochet for now, and more Stranger Things.
More Stranger Things, more crochet, and no doubt the odd op-ed as well. But
yeah,
from all of us here, thank you so much for your time. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you. We hope you've enjoyed this Understanding Boys podcast. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app, and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.